Hello, everyone, and good morning from California. Good afternoon from the Azores, and of course, good afternoon as well for those following us in other parts of the world, including our friends on the East Coast. On behalf of the California Portuguese the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, I should say, PBBI from Fresno State, California State University, Fresno. Welcome. This is semester of 2023 and our fall semester of 2023, and we are proud to have this be our very first event of the PBBI, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute Fall Lecture Conference and Conversation Series. It is a series that we put forth, usually with anywhere between 10 to 12 different events in one semester. We're kind of overambitious, and in that aspect, to try to bring awareness of the Portuguese American experience in California. That is our mandate at PBBI, being the hub for all that is Portuguese at an academic institution such as Fresno State, where we have at this semester 25,000 students. And of course, our second mandate is to connect the dots, to use the title of this project, between the Azores or the Azores Islands and California, Portugal in general, the Lusophone world also, but indeed in Central California and throughout the state of California, where we have, according to the census, about 350,000 folks who are of Portuguese ancestry. Over 90% have roots or are from the islands of the Azores. So our mandate is always partial to the Azores for that simple reason. That's what the community wants to hear and would like to have more information about. So we have two guests, as all of you can see online, and those of you who will watch us later, all of our programs are archived in two different formats. One of them is, of course, through PBBI Fresno State YouTube channel, and the other one is at our library, the Fresno State Library, the Oral History Collection at Fresno State, and for our students to have access to that as well. We have Fernando Brum and Calvino Brum, a father and son team. They've just started a very unique project in the Azores, and I can't think of a better way to begin this conference series for the fall of 2023 than with these two young men. Obviously, Calvino is younger than his father, but they're both young. And we'll start with, first of all, thanking both of you for taking the time. Appreciate the time that you're given to Fresno State and the California Portuguese American community with Azorean roots, and congratulating you on your project, and welcome.
And we would like to thank you as well for all of your support. And basically, the project was born because you've planted the seeds for many, many years. And all the years that I've known you, you have worked very, very hard to connect both points, the Azores and California. And you do a superb job and tireless job of promoting everything that's Portuguese. So it is indeed our pleasure to be here with you.
A few words from you as well, Calvino, and you don't have to thank me anything. And it's not my responsibility. Okay, this project, whether it's and it's going to be successful, I'm not taking credit for any of it. On the contrary of what Fernando said. But Calvino, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to revisit my roots, although it works the other way around as our podcast does. But it's also one of my wishes is to connect back to where I was born, and also connect the people over there back to here, and linking up both of these, I should say, parts of America and also of Portugal.
That's a very interesting take on it, connecting the roots from the other angle. So let's talk about the project. So the project is a podcast. It's called Connecting the Dots, and but it has a specific flavor to it. And we'll start with you, Fernando, because of course, for those of you who don't know, Fernando lived here in California. Fernando worked in the Portuguese press here in California. That's where I met him. At the time, we did a symposium, and Fernando came to a few of them here in Tulare. And he was very, very young at the time and very vivacious, as he still is, I'm sure. But it was obviously a different time in the Portuguese American community. and the community has changed immensely in the last 25 plus years. No immigration to speak of. When Fernando was here, it had already kind of died out, and it completely has died out since then. We have a few families come here and there. In the 2008 crisis, we had maybe 15, 20 families, but that's what used to come in a week in the 1960s and 70s from the Azores to California. So, Fernando, what other than, and that's not about me or the seed, but what are your thoughts on this project? Why did you begin it, and what you hope to achieve with this project of connecting the dots, connecting the Azores to the communities and vice versa? Because there is a need for us to know more about the Azores here, but there's also a need, as you showed with your first interview that we'll play a little bit of an excerpt, there's also a need for Azoreans to understand the diaspora. Your thoughts?
Well, basically, it was Calvino's idea that we should do something together. And initially, we were thinking of some sort of a format that we could work together as a team. And I suggested to him that we do a podcast in English and try to reach out to the Portuguese American community and Canada as well, because it's a significant community, and because I have always thought that we went through various phases. Like in 1974, when I arrived in California, in Newark, California. Parents weren't teaching their children how to speak Portuguese, so there wasn't an emphasis on maintaining the Portuguese language or to really connect. It was more of an emphasis on assimilating, and so I remembering back to those days, there was a little bit of kind of I don't want to say like racist or anything, but certainly there was some biases in terms of how we were treated back then. And by the time I reached high school, this that I was initially talking was sixth grade, so still elementary school. By the time I got into high school, the scene was pretty much that some of us were assimilating, and more of our friends were already Luso-Americans born in California, and didn't really speak but a few words in Portuguese. So it enabled me to pick up the language faster, obviously. But there was another niche that kind of clung together and was very much Portuguese, and so outside of classrooms they were still speaking Portuguese, and so there was this dichotomy about our diaspora. And as it evolved, and as we got into the 90s, then a lot of people who were born in the US, for example, were in fact searching for relatives and for ways to come back to the Azores and to get information on the Azores, and to really find out where their roots were at. And so that's when I suggested to him that we do it this way and try to reach out to those folks and provide information on how they could possibly track down their family roots. And by the same token, we wanted to reach out to these niches, because in many ways, today's traveling to the Azores is still a travel back in time. We're still, in a lot of things, still way behind the rest of the world. But in another way, we have niches that are very much in step with the evolution of the rest of the world. Like, for example, we have people who are now trying to grow Wagyu beef in the Azores, which is kind of a leap forward in terms of what the cattle industry was in the Azores. That's just, of course, one example. Then there are other tourist endeavors that are very unique, and a couple that we interviewed already. They one of them doesn't have any roots to the Portuguese community, but his partner, Margot, great grandparents were from the parish of Feteira here in excuse me, in the island of Fayal, and so they are now recuperating that farm and creating their own way of farming, and they're learning with the the old farmers some of the old ways, the cycles of the moon, and including all of this into how they plan to plant their crops and that sort of thing. And so she tells me that she has the foundation for the barn already up, and so the project is going to take off and take the format of the sopage, where you have the long table with people from different cultures sitting together and engaging in a conversation and passing the sopage and passing the meat and that sort of thing, and as they cater to like groups of 14 people.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I saw the story, and it's I'm glad you did a podcast with them, because the very small news story just to open the appetite to actually get to know what these folks are doing. So, as Fernando said, Calvino, this was kind of your idea to do the podcast, based on, of course, your dad's experience and yours as well. First of all, congratulations. Well, not on Fernando's English, because he came over here in the 6th grade, so he has, but on your English, being in Portugal and going there so young, and knowing the language very, very, very well, which is amazing, because it seems like in the Azores more and more young people do speak English, and so that's a plus to communicate with the Portuguese Americans who don't speak English, as your dad said. There were in the 1970s and 80s. I recall my eldest son was born in 1980, and when he went to kindergarten, he didn't know a word of English, or he knew maybe 2 or 3 words in English, but we made a conscientious decision to only speak to him in Portuguese. And so he has never forgotten Portuguese, because it was his first language. But he was kind of a rarity. There were other families, fortunately, here in the Valley, but more and more in the 1980s, people were not already speaking Portuguese, or enough for them to be fluent with their children. So English is kind of the lingua franca of the world, and we all know that. So Calvino, how important do you think this is? And your generation, let me ask you that. I mean, you have a tie to America, different tie but you have friends and family members in the Azores and throughout Portugal. Does your generation understand this I can't think of the word in English now, but I'll get to it. This ligação. It's sometimes easier when you're bilingual. You flip from one to another, and sometimes you can't think of both. But this link between the Azores and the Americas, which is so strong and so powerful, and as your father just mentioned, with the Wagyu beef of our good friend Roberto Lino and others, there are so many opportunities for the Azores to go beyond what everybody else in the world is doing. So my question to you is, what does this project, of course, mean to you, that you enticed your dad to start it with you, number one? Number two, how do you see your generation and their connections to America in today's world? And do you think that in this, through the podcast, this can be another way to bring folks together?
Well, actually, I'd like to say that my first words were cão e água. That's dog and water in Portuguese. And so I also experienced that of the Portuguese language being inculcated to me since I was a little child. And so my main language always was Portuguese. I don't know how I picked up on English, even though since I think 2nd grade or something, already here in the Azores, we started learning English. It was something that wasn't being done before. It wasn't mandatory. Now it is. It's a mandatory subject until the 9th grade. And that I think helps a lot in growing and planting the seed of the English language and making Portuguese people speaking more in English. And also, like you said, it's imperative nowadays, as the world is so vast. The English helps us to shorten up a bit the distance between ourselves and the world, and to communicate better. And so this podcast, I loved how my father made it look so linear and like we had the whole thing planned, but we didn't. Um, so did I. So didn't I. I didn't have anything planned, but I actually went. I'm majoring in journalism,
Hmm.
and so I had contact with radio. I'm currently founding the radio in my university. It was something that wasn't up and running like it should be, because we have, as we say in Portuguese, we have the bread and cheese, so we ought to do something with it. And that's what I did. I started doing it, started doing some interviews and posting them online. And now I'm just waiting for the all clear from the school board, so we can get the radio up and running from the beginning of this year. And so that's where all started. That's where the bug started to grow deep inside of me. And so when I came to the Azores, I wanted to keep practicing and get involved with radio. Before, my first contact with radio was in Antena Nove, the local radio here, where I started doing soccer broadcasts. um, and then the opportunity to work with Azores Higher Radio showed up, and they have all the equipment and the urge to help me. And so I've been working with them, and I started doing the coverage. I did the coverage of Semana do Mar with them, and we did regular broadcasts on Facebook. So the diaspora and all our immigrant communities abroad, of course, mainly in the United States and Canada, could be brought back to the Azores, and who knows, maybe to their roots, and be closer to their roots, the family that they left behind. And that was kind of a starting point for me and for my father. I think that's where everything started to make sense. But obviously, of course, we emigrated 18 years ago, but we're still part of America, and America is still part of us. America did some great things to my father. It did some great things to me. Maybe here in Portugal, I wasn't going to be able to be born, since my mother was already 42, and it was a high risk pregnancy. And so the United States and the technological advances did just that and did the trick. And so I think me and my father, we both have something that we want to return for the good that America did on us. On the second part of that question, I think I already started to mix the two, but English, like I said, it's imperative. But also one aspect that changed is the fact that the tie is still there, but I think it's more of a dotted line between Portugal and the United States.
Elaborate on that, please, Calvin.
Yes, absolutely.
Why do you say a dotted line? Because that fascinates me.
Already, like you mentioned, the immigration from the Azores to the United States is nothing compared to what it was 30 years ago. And so that shows us that the world keeps evolving, and also that connection keeps evolving, and maybe it's starting to work the other way around. And I'm fortunate enough to be contacting more and more with my family that has been coming to visit me from the United States. I still have lots of cousins and uncles in the United States, and nowadays, um, instead of what it was, and my first time visiting them was the other way around. I went visiting them in the United States. Now they're coming to visit me more and more often, and so I don't think the United States is seen like it was seen 30 years ago. Um, Maybe, like I said, that's a good sign. That's a sign of evolution, and a sign that we're keeping up and giving our people what their needs are and what they need to grow. Um, but I don't know. It's something that intrigues me a lot. Um, what happened here, but of course, a lot of people like me and my father, we still are deeply connected back to the United States, even though we're thousands of miles away. And so I think it's a tie and a bond that can never go away. For example, Margot was already born in Rhode Island, and the only way she got in touch with the Azores was through her mom. And so I think it's something that will be passed through generations, and hopefully, like us, they're gonna be curious and want to know where they came from and bond with their roots, because it's some work that has to be done. So you
Indeed.
need to get your hands dirty and
It's
bond.
a
And
if I can elaborate a little bit here, it's hard to explain, but I was born in Pico, Freguesia das Ribeiras, uh, and so um, when I because I now live in Fayal, across the 6 Mile Channel, I there's periods of time where I can't get back there, but whenever I get back there, as soon as I step on land in Madalena, um, it, it feels different. It feels like nothing else, nowhere else. When I was in Newark, California, I often went to Oakland and took the ferry to San Francisco just so I could get on the water and make that connection with the water. So it's hard to explain. And then as far as like the connection to the US, I mean it's a lifeline that can never be broken. I don't think that people on either side of these points will ever allow it to be broken. And of course, there are a lot of people that do a lot to promote the language. And interesting, I was reading an article the other day, and I am sorry that I forgot the name of the person, but it's a person of Portuguese descent that was born in the Hawaiian Islands and worked for the New York Times. And he started off and got my curiosity with an interesting title, because he said that Portuguese soft power was far more than malasadas. And then he proceeded to explain and how, because of our diaspora spread throughout the globe, that Portugal was one of the small countries that had this huge influence on the world through the work of their immigrants that were talking about what the Azores or what Lisbon and Porto is like to their neighbors, and thus their neighbors were then being intrigued and trying to get here, to travel to here. Interestingly enough, yesterday I was in Pico, in the middle of Pico, and I received a message from one of my school colleagues in high school, one of my high school colleagues, And she was telling me that she's planning to visit Pico next year with her husband and search for some of her family. And so we started chatting about how we could go about it and how I could help and that sort of thing. And she was already born there. Her mother was already born there, so she's having a heck of a time trying to piece together the steps to all the way back to that starting point of the root.
Indeed, indeed, and that's and I'm glad you mentioned that, Fernando. Adding to that, the so-called Portuguese soft power, because that is one of our. That's I think that hopefully the podcast will be and I know it will be a wonderful contribution to this. And I know that, and we'll play a little bit of just an excerpt from the interview, the conversation with Telmo Faria, who is an icon in the Portuguese culinary experience in California for many reasons. Telmo's an icon because of his successful business, but also because of his humanitarian approach to things. He is, to me, what a true Azorean is like. Very, very much into the humanitarian aspect of the world. And so there is this need to go beyond what I call, without any hesitation, but also without wanting to sound elitist or anything like that. That's not my style, as those who know me know that. But the folkloric aspect, not folklore dancing, but the folkloric aspect of the culture, of the connections, of the legacies of this quote unquote soft power that are the immigrants, and especially the second, third, fourth, and fifth generations. I mean, I have in 22 years that I taught in high school, and now my last few years in the university, I have literally, and College of the Sequoias for over a couple of decades, I have hundreds of examples of people with names that you would never associate with being Portuguese. And I ask them, why are you taking the class? And they say, because I'm Portuguese, and the famous one is John Gabrowski, who said, I'm Portuguese. I said, and I kidded him, yeah, the name like Gabrowski is all over Portugal. And of course he understood, and he said, no, he said this wonderful line that I'll never forget. John told me this, it was my second year teaching there, so it's been over 23, 24 years ago, more than that. And he said to me this wonderful thing. He said, no, I'm Portuguese. I'm an Azorean because my vó velhinha was from São Jorge, which is the term that we used years ago for bisavó. Before, in many of the rural aspects of these years, was avó velhinha, the second grandmother. And that's the only two words he knew still in Portuguese. And he said, no. And later on, I found out that he was Azorean, as he would like to call himself, but he was also Native American, Scottish, and Polish. So he had 4 different ethnicities, but the one that he connected to was that power, that soft power, as you mentioned, Fernando, of that vó velhinha from São Jorge. And
Absolutely.
So we need to kind of look even from the political aspect. I'm not talking about politics as in party A versus party B, but as in politics as a region. We need to look at this. We're still doing politics in public policy as if we had, and we still do, an immigrant community, and that represents probably about not even 20% of who we are. In California, 33,000 of the 350 who are Portuguese background claim to still speak some Portuguese. That means there are 320,000 who don't speak Portuguese but consider themselves Portuguese and Azorean. Yet our public policy in the Azores is still tied only to those 30,000 and not to the other 320,000. How does that make any sense? And I know, Fernando, you probably have lots of thoughts on that.
Absolutely, and the only way that I can think of explaining it is with a story that I lived, where this individual showed up here at my door, where we have the pizzeria and a small lodge, looking for a room. And so he had his backpack and kind of the grunge look of a camper, and he was looking for a room. So we started chatting, and I showed him the room, and so he stayed in the room. The next morning he wakes up, and he asks me if there were tattoo artists here in Fayal. And I said, I don't have any tattoos, but I have some employees who do have, and I'm sure they know, so let me go ask. And I went in the kitchen, they asked, and so they asked, or rather they told me about this fellow who lives here, no bairro das Pedreiras, which is part of Angustias in the city of Horta. And so it's a social homes type. I think I'm botching the term here, but it's
Yeah,
public
kind of
house,
public housing. Yeah,
public
housing.
house.
Mhm.
And so he has this little shack, and so he and I walked over to this the supermarket across the street so he could buy all the alcohol and the stuff to clean his tools and make sure everything was all sterile, and before he proceeded. And so the fellow, the American fellow, then pulls up his sleeve and he shows a circle that was tattooed in his right arm, and it had it was divided into 4 squares. And so he had just one little branch to color in. All the other 3 were colored in. And so he proceeded to explain that because he had reached back here, where his great-grandmother left from, he had now completed his circle of life. And so he on his father's side was Native American Indian from the Washington area, the Washington State area, and his family was from Santa Maria. And he was he obviously made his way all the way through Fayal and stuff. And so he's telling this tattoo artist who's not very educated. He probably just got the 9th grade education, which is at the time was what you were obliged to complete before you could leave school. And so his sister shows up and asks, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I am going to draw the smallest tattoo in my life, but the biggest one in this gentleman's life." And I called the newspaper because I thought it was such an interesting idea that he wanted to get a tattoo here. And I called them and I said, "This is an excellent photo opportunity and you guys should come out and whatever and so forth." They didn't come out. They didn't understand. But these 2 young people who have very little education understood the powerfulness of this little line that he was going to draw on this man's arm.
Indeed, that's a powerful statement. Yeah, my smallest must at the same time my largest because of what it means to him and what it meant to him. Indeed, and so Calvino, your dad made a good point there. You know, he reached out as a citizen, as a responsible citizen, to the newspapers, to the media outlets, and whichever media, to have this story told, because it is a powerful story. It's what connects people more than, you know, if unemployment's up 2% or down 2%, or, you know, those things are important, but they don't connect the dots. And so as a journalism student in Portugal, if I may take it that way, what are your thoughts on that, on the citizen that, you know, that has a story, and that sometimes journalists think that they're the only ones that have a story? In your dad's case, he had been a journalist before, but they probably didn't even look at that. But the thing is, how do they, you know, how do you look at journalism as a student? Do you think, is it about putting forth press releases, as it happens so much in the Portuguese press and the Azorean press? 90% of press releases from the government. Or is it about a human story that connects the dots for, and I'm using that deliberately to promote, of course, your podcast.
And we appreciate it.
Well, I think as many aspects of our life have become, journalism in Portugal, it's a business. And so sometimes the best story, it's not the story that sells. And so there's a lot of stories like the one my father mentioned that become untold and forgotten as time flies and goes by. And so what I've learned and what I've embraced as a journalism major, is everybody has a story to tell. And so it's something that I'm really keen on doing in our podcast. And like you mentioned, there's a huge chunk of the Californian population that's descendant from Portuguese, that are Portuguese, but can't speak a word of Portuguese. And so I think it's something that really needs to be done, and it's to try and mitigate that a language barrier that is going on between that big piece of the population. And one other thing that I'd like to mention, and it's something that me and my father came across. So we asked the local radio if we could post our podcast and if they could broadcast our podcast, as, like I said, Azores High can reach out to the population and to the immigrant population. And they said, well, we're really sorry, but the regulatory entity of journalism and social communications doesn't allow us to air a podcast in English. And I said, well, that's just stupid. And I think, and we ought to protect what's ours and our Portuguese inheritance. And but like I said, we're drifting and we're leaving those people adrift, those people that are Portuguese in essence, and who knows, truly in their hearts. And so, of course, not every podcast should be in English, but as my father worked in California in a Portuguese newspaper in the heart of America, in a land that speaks English and the native language is English. And so I think we should, especially from our background and from that
Indeed.
tie that connects Portugal to the United States so heavily and so fond, I think we ought to do the same and implement that, and not try and mitigate the last resort that we have in resembling and still keep in touch with that connection.
Indeed, that's a very good point. And
Just-
and
just-
go ahead, Fernando, please.
Just to expand a little bit, it's basically okay. The United States obviously speaks English, but prior to that, the natives had their own languages, and so the native language of that the land, which is now the United States, had many different native languages. But that's just to clarify that part. The other part is that the regulatory entity has very old rules that apply to the media, and so it's not very democratized in the sense that it's not just because we can't do a program geared toward the diaspora in North America. In the English, in a language is more accessible to them, but there are many other aspects that people in the radio, for example, explained to me that they have to, if they're going to incorporate a new program, they have to present them with a format and everything very detailed, and they have to approve it before it goes on the air, and so those things still smell like the old dictatorship, if you will.
Well, indeed, and it's and what would we be as a community in the United States of America, the Portuguese American community and the Azorean community in particular, if we hadn't had Portuguese radio? I mean,
Of
it was,
course.
the as Calvino mentioned, the majority of the radio stations in America and the U.S. and Canada are in English and French for Canada. But that doesn't mean that there aren't Portuguese radio programs, Mandarin, Chinese, Spanish, etc. And so that's kind of doesn't make any sense. And the thing that doesn't make any sense is because I would think that what is it, like 80% of the music played in the radio stations in the Azores are in English. So why can't you speak the language that you're playing the darn music? But that's but here is where indeed we talk a lot about autonomy. This is where the autonomy comes in. This is where our legislative body there in the beautiful city of Horta comes in and says, listen, we are Portuguese, but we are different. We have this connection with America, and we have this human soft power in the United States and Canada, of nearly 1 million people, 4 times the population of the Azores, that want to connect with us. And we need to do this in English. And it would also be a good program to have as people visit the islands and can listen to something interesting in the language that they speak. And also because you know this better than I do, living there, of course. And Fayal has had that tradition for many years, but now all of the islands just about in the Azores, which is, there's people from what I was just saw a news article. There's people from over 65 nationalities, and what unifies them as they learn Portuguese, the English language. That's how they can kind of communicate, because everybody, whether you speak Romanian or Ukrainian or this or that, you speak some English. So before you transition to Portuguese, the language that unifies is English. So it just doesn't make any sense. You're right. It's very outdated procedures. But that's where autonomy comes in. If we are not autonomous enough to say this is what goes on our radio waves, we really don't have autonomy.
Right, but then it goes back to the point that you made earlier, that we're still legislating to the smaller to the minority rather than the majority, and with a more encompassing view of where we sit in the world today, and with the technologies that we have that enables us to do this program in this format. Where years ago, when I was at Jornal Português in São Paulo, I had enormous difficulty just getting news from the Luso agency, and they were supposed to be providing us with news based on an agreement with the government and stuff, and so we weren't getting any news. I came up with this impromptu situation where on the weekly basis I would call a friend here in Horta, and they would give me like a little synopsis of what was happening in the city and what was going to happen in the future. But then the costs of the call were so great that it was unsustainable.
Indeed, and these regulatory agencies in the Azores especially need to open up to the diaspora, because more than having the official radio station do something, it's always important to have private companies and private entrepreneurship and citizens and journalism students take the initiative rather than just wait for the official voice to tell us what to do. So kudos for doing that. I wanted to just share a little bit of the podcast with if I may, with I know you've done several others, but this one was the very first one with Telmo. And then we could, on the outset of it, talk a little bit about it and talk about your future interviews and what you hope to achieve with it, and even a couple of ideas before we run out of time. So let me share a little bit here. I think we can see that. We'll be able to see the whole program, but I think that we can at least see what's going on and listen to a little bit of it.
Connecting the dots. From Fayal to the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second episode of Connecting the Dots. As you well know, I'm your host, Calvino Brum,
And today we actually have two special guests. One of them is actually going to conduct this interview for today's episode. And that man will be my father, Fernando Brum. You might know him as well. He's very popular. um, and we figured, since this is a program that links up Portugal and the Azores, especially Fayal, of course, with the immigrant communities, obviously we needed a proper immigrant. I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 2 years old, but my father has very larger luggage, if you may. And so I'd like to call him to the deck, and he'll present his guest and get going with this fantastic interview with an amazing guest that we had the opportunity to meet here in Fayal. I'll be listening closely, and of course, once again, Calvino Brum signing out and leaving you with our greatest voices for today's episode.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, and I will now try to give you a little background on our guest before I reveal his name. He and I go back to the 80s when we met here in Fayal. Of course, he was just a child back then. His father was the owner of restaurants here on the island. And so that played a little bit of a role in what he's doing today in the romantic, mythical city of San Francisco by the Bay. He owns and operates the restaurant Uma Casa, which is a multicultural cuisine, but with emphasis on the Portuguese cuisine, which he is very well connected to. The gentleman that I am talking about was born in Hayward, California, and spent a lot of his childhood here in Fayal, including playing for Angustias Athletic Club in the youth leagues, and then working at a restaurant with his father. I am talking about Antelmo Faria, or Chef Telmo. So we will start with how did you get involved in culinary? Obviously, you had to go to school for that.
Yeah, I think the school was just the kind of more formal process of me getting to where I wanted to go and kind of pursue the passion and kind of the dreams that I've had for a long time, and I knew that I wanted to formalize that process. So I decided to go to culinary school.
And we're going to end it there, so we don't take any element of the surprise out, so people can listen to the podcast in its entirety, because it's wonderful. I've had the opportunity to listen to it and shared it, and I will continue to do that.
If you take away the nervousness and the blockage there, it'll be okay. But
no, there's no nervousness, and no.
Telmo didn't pick up on that, so he was really great.
Yeah, Telmo's great. So the idea is to do these on a regular basis, and the idea is to connect the dots in various ways. Will you be doing with people who live here and go back and forth like Telmo does? But you also can do it with people who live there, as you've called about Margot and her partner, and the Wagyu situation with Roberto Lino. And there's so much creativity with people in the Azores that is unknown in the communities, and would love to see that.
We obviously are just starting off, and there's a lot of things that we need to tinker with and make it better visually, and the format. We don't necessarily want to get stuck to one particular format, because I have other ideas. I discovered o Sr. Laurindo Cardoso na Candelária do Pico. And sorry, I went into the Portuguese mode there. but it's the little parish that is very involved in folklore. And so the interesting thing about him is he makes musical instruments, string instruments, a viola da terra, a guitarra portuguesa, and several others. He's created a variety of like 6 different instruments. And the other interesting thing about it is he plays them all. So he builds them and plays them, and I think that that's an interesting niche. And we'll have to figure out a different approach, more like a news story and some commentary in between, and put out a podcast that way. This Monday and Tuesday, I went to Pico. I was trying to interview Roberto Lino, as we mentioned, but I wasn't able to do that. On my way, I discovered this tiny museum that is in a little place called Guindastre, or Crane, where many people believe that the first president of the Portuguese Republic, Manuel Arriaga, was actually born there and not necessarily in Fayal. But of course, you know, Fayal, perhaps with more a stronger argument, built a statue here in Fayal of Manuel Arriaga being a native of Fayal Island. So that's some of the ideas that we have, that we are massaging and trying to figure out how we can present these things. So in the museum, obviously, we'll have to go back in time and show you know, the loom and the winemaking tools and everything that's there. And of course, I think the person that owns it is Manuel Costa, qualquer coisa Costa, agora esquece-me o nome, não quero estar aqui a deturpar o nome do senhor, mas o senhor escreve também, so he writes books, and so he'll be able to tell us about how all of these things fit together. So it should be interesting to provide a walk back in time, and then bring it all back into the future, and how we are and how we connect and so forth.
And these things are totally unique, and they're you know, beyond what's being done. So kudos to you and to Calvino for doing that, and hopefully we can, you know, get this through multiple platforms where people can listen to it and participate and even have ideas for you.
Well, we are very lucky, because we have got your support from the day one, and also Mauricio Carlos de Jesus with Radio Ilhéu has been fantastic, because he already has like a 5,000 plus following, so he's enabled us to tap into that niche of our audience. And so we're using this in an approach of collaboration with anyone that wants to cooperate with us and open doors for us. We will definitely make our material available to them, and they can use it in their own media to whatever they want.
Indeed. And as we come on the end of this, we went over a little bit the 45 minutes, but that's fine. It's interesting conversations. We are not set to a different timeline. And we thank all of the nice comments that people are putting on, and some of the things that's the likes, and also the 35 or 36 groups that are now carrying it, which is great, because that's how we get, of course, the word out. And again, this will be archived through the PBBI YouTube channel, and of course, at our Fresno State Library for our students and faculty and staff. Calvino, as a student of journalism, let's turn to you to try to end this conversation and talk about one of the things, which is, I think you'd be a perfect candidate for something I would love to put together, and have talked to my colleagues in the East Coast, which is having a journalism student from Portugal come and do an internship of about a month or two, or at least a month in the East Coast, and work with the Portuguese media in both languages, you know, Portuguese and English. So it might be something that you might want to be thinking about. We're going to try to put a project together in the next 6 months or so, but because there is a need for And there's actually a need, even at Fresno State, we're working on a program to try to see if we can build more relationships, not necessarily in the community, but between journalists themselves, American journalists, of all ethnicities, because Americans are hush posh of everything. So journalists in the Fresno State area, and we have an excellent the Medium Communications and Journalism Department, MCJ, with journalists in Portugal and journalists in Europe as well. We have an outstanding relationship with journalists in Mexico and different parts of Latin America, but not in Europe. And I've always told my colleagues at MCJ, the first step to get into Europe is the Azores. So we are Europe. So and we're kind of a crossbreed between those two continents. So as a journalist student, how important is this kind of a project for you? And do you think that from this fusion of all these different ideas that you and your father have, that journalism itself, because you mentioned earlier, we were talking about, necessarily sometimes some of the stories don't sell, but do you think that the future of journalism, because now we have the so-called citizen journalist, the man or the woman who can get a phone and put something out on social media, and it becomes the lead story that's viral, with in the United States, 500,000 or 1 million hits. How do you think that the future of journalism as a student of yourself, of this discipline, is going to be, and how important are these alternative, what we call in the United States, alternative mediums, as a podcast, such as the blogs, all of this alternative stuff that actually sometimes gets better coverage or better hits than something that's put out, with all due respect, and I'm a reader of the New York Times. So and they themselves, the major newspapers in America nowadays. Just a few weeks ago, we had an interesting conversation with Michael Hazindish, who I'm sure your dad knows of, and will be part of our Politicus podcast from Palcus. And he was the spotlight team at the Boston newspaper, and responsible for getting a couple of Pulitzer prizes, and one of them for ousting putting forth the story of corruption in the Catholic Church, corruption and the issue with sexual assault. And Michael was telling us that everything that he puts now together, he works for the Associated Press, everything that he puts down with the Associated Press has a mixture of three things. Has, of course, Associated Press is a print, as both of you know, and all of our audience, has a story, but there's usually some kind of an audio, and there's usually some kind of a video, because sometimes people don't want to read the 40,000 words or the 20,000 words, but they read bits and pieces, and then they hear the sound and they see the video. So how do you see this as a student? I'm very, very I'm intrigued to see how a young Portuguese Azorean doing a journalism major in Portugal sees the future of journalism, and how these things, these facets, these aspects, these segments, such as podcasts and others, can play a prominent and an important role.
Well, something that we talked about over and over in this first year of my major is that journalism isn't definitely what it was 30 years ago, for example, when my father worked. Obviously, now we have a great gift and also a great responsibility of being able to connect to a story that's halfway across the world in almost instant time. And so we're over-informed nowadays. We're overwhelmed with information that's coming from left, from right, from Asia, from Europe. And one thing that I think helps people to try and depict those stories better and isolate those stories, and having the power to choose if the story is willing of their hearing, is through the diverse channels that we have nowadays. So audio, video, much the better, the more the better. And so that you can see, and for now, every radio is reverting to the online and reverting to the internet, as it's a highway that connects everybody everywhere. And so I think journalism more than ever, and like I've been now knowing and having the opportunity to work with uh, these past few months when I started this podcast with my father, is the connections. The connections more than ever mean everything. And so you need to be able to have a strong connection with a source that's reliable and that you can count on and work with without any hesitation. And so I think that that would be really interesting, that internship and that exchange of not only cultures but obviously insights, as we usually say here in Portugal. Two heads think more better than one, and so as much knowledge and as much interchange of culture and ideas that we have, that's the way to go forward, and that's the way that journalism can keep up with this technological advanced world and the fast pace that news and our everyday lives are currently.
Indeed, and that's a good way to come to the closing of this conversation, our very first for PBBI, Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. The podcast it is called Connecting the Dots. Look for it. We certainly will promote it as much as possible. All the new episodes and all the episodes have been done as well. We want to wish both of you best of luck with this. We want to thank you for your vision and for your commitment to a unique project. I think what makes the Azores unique and what makes the diaspora unique, being not big in both aspects, that is, a population of 250,000 people in the middle of the Atlantic is not, of course, a mega city or a mega group of islands as far as population is concerned. But there are unique opportunities when that happens. And the same thing in the diaspora, maybe because we are in the United States, Azorean anyway, with Azorean connections, about 750 to 800,000, and then another, 3 to 400 in Canada. So we're a little over 1 million, maybe because we are just over 1 million in two countries that combined have about 352 million people. Maybe because we are around 1 million, we can do unique things that sometimes when you have, all of these mega millions, you can't even do, because you're thinking, how many people can I reach? And what we're trying to do, and what this unique program tried to do and did very well from my perspective anyway, is a different niche, a niche that telling a story that is not told, but it is an Azorean story, whether it is with Telmo's experience, whether it is with what you mentioned, Fernando, the uniqueness of making instruments that you can also play. Those are kinds of the things that sometimes young people in college, especially, I can tell you, my students wish they would have the luxury to do, because they're thinking, how can I finish a degree to pay this, this $78,000 debt that I just got myself into, and so I'm not going to have even if I'm going into music, I'm going to have to do something that produces money to pay this. I don't have the luxury to sit in my garage and create musical instruments and play and still have a good living. And so I think these alternative livings, these different ways of doing things in the world, are appealing. They may not be appealing to the immigrant community because they came here for a different reason. And they may not even be appealing to the first generation who saw their parents, struggle through some of the things that they had to go through in life here. But they're certainly appealing to second, third, and fourth generation. I can't tell you how many students, and many of them, that's not going to happen, but how many students I've had, especially at the community college where I get older students as well, that the reason they want to learn Portuguese is because they want to go to the Azores to live, not to go see the Azores, but they want to go live in the country that their grandfather or their great-grandfather came from. And why not with these different niches? So your podcast is going to present a different view, and a view that's important for us. So thank you both. I appreciate your time very, very much. On behalf of PBBI, on behalf of the university, anything that we can do, we're here to help, because connecting the dots is something very important for us at the Institute. And it's so nice to see you again, Fernando, after all these years. And Calvino, nice to meet you as well. And best of luck to you. And the last words will be both of yours. So, Fernando.
I want to thank you very much for your time and for supporting this project and for everything that you do once again. And it was wonderful to see you, and I wish you all the best. And perhaps on one of your trips to the Azores, we will sit down and have dinner quietly.
Yes, away from all the noise. Indeed.
With some Azorean wine to go
Claro,
with it.
claro, that's a must. And I must tell you that if this project comes forth through next summer, and I'm hoping it does, we've been working at this for almost 2 years, we are going to have hopefully around 10 to 12 students from our agricultural program at Fresno State.
That's a definite podcast right there.
That will be doing a 10-day, or well, it'll actually be 8 days there, 8-day internship working in the vineyards of Pico. So that would be, I think, a wonderful podcast to see what they're all American students. There'll be a couple that are Portuguese American, but they'll be like third or fourth generation. They're just students of our winemaking program here at Fresno State. And I think with 2 professors who will be for 8 days working the World Heritage Sites of vineyards in Pico Island. So I'm already putting in the bug in your ear for a possible podcast.
Very exciting. And thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Calvino, so the young person has the last word.
Well, yeah, I'll try not to go too long on this one, because obviously I think we are already in extra time now. But that shows how important this connection that we have is, and the importance of connecting the dots as what we're trying to do with our podcast. It's something that I'm really fond of, even though I came when I was 2 years old. My father's also really fond of. And so seeing and hearing your insights of how much, even though the world has changed, how much the Azorean community means to the Californians and to the immigrant communities that are over there and that are eager to connect here with us in the middle of the Atlantic. That for me, it's really inspiring, and it fuels me, and I know it fuels my dad also. It fuels us to put episodes out and to work on our podcasts. Like my father said, it's still an embryo. We're still feeding it and trying to mold it in our way, and hopefully in your way, and the way that the immigrants and people that want to connect back to our roots have the dignity and have obviously the will and power to know.
Thank you both so much. Thanks to all of you who listen to us. Thanks to those who will be following us also out at the PBBI YouTube channel. Best of luck. Connecting the Dots is the name of the podcast. It's connecting the Azorean Diaspora in the Azores. It's connecting those who speak the English language independently, if you're an Azorean or not, that want to know a bit more about the Azores and the uniqueness of this connection between a diaspora that is in North America 4 times larger as far as population than the islands themselves. On behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, Fresno State, we thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening and wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.